you need some defensive help, here's 5 defenses that can make you reach the promised land and help you win your championship this weekend. The first one is the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals defense, I know they haven't been good in real life, but I think this week in fantasy football, they can help you win your matchup or be a part of it. They versus the San Francisco 49ers that give up the 4th most fantasy points to defenses. This is a Saturday game at 4:30, and right now, this Frisco offense, they turn the ball over a lot, and we saw it last week versus the Dallas Cowboys, who rarely get the ball turned over. It caused 4 turnovers on the San Francisco offense. And last week versus Philly, they had a decent game, this Arizona defense. 6 sacks, a safety, and a block kick. And this week, I think they're going to cause more havoc and have a good fantasy game versus the San Francisco 49ers. And they're still available in 53% of fantasy leagues if you need a defense. The second defense I would start here this week's the Houston Texans. The Texans, they're not a great defense this season, but this is matchup based, and they versus the Cincinnati Bengals that give up the 5th most fantasy points to defenses. The Texans, they haven't cracked double-digit fantasy points since week 12, but I think in this matchup, J.J. Watt and that defensive line could get to Finley a few times and have a few sacks. They possibly could get a pick 6 or a couple fumble recoveries because Tyler Boyd, he's probably not going to play. Joe Mixon, he's out once again. And obviously Joe Burrow, he's not coming back this season. So I think the Texans defense is a sneaky start this week, and they could definitely help your team. The third defense I would start this week is the Washington football team. Last week it was a tough matchup for them versus the Seattle Seahawks, but in terms of giving up points on the board, they didn't give up much, but for fantasy purpose, they didn't do much. 20 points allowed in an into, but this week versus the Carolina Panthers, I think this front seven, led by Chase Young, could get to the quarterback early and often. I think Bridgewater, he's good for 1 or 2 turnovers at least in this game. And Washington, if Dwayne Haskins is going to start again, they're going to have to rely on this defense to make a few plays, and I think this defense does make a few plays, and they're going to help your fantasy team this week. So they're the third start. The fourth start's the Chicago Bears. The Bears got a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Bears defense, they got some players on it, but their fantasy points have been up and down. But in week 14, they had a huge game, only 7 points allowed, 7 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries, and a safety. So I could see similar stats this week at Jacksonville that gives up the 9th most fantasy points to defenses. And last week versus Minnesota, they didn't have a great game, is this Bear unit. But I think the Bears, they can make some plays, like I said. They could hold this Jacksonville offense down, and their offensive line is weak. So I could see a lot of sacks in this one. And the 5th and final defense I would start this week is the Cleveland Browns. They got a cupcake matchup versus the New York Jets. The Browns defense last week, they didn't do much versus Colt McCoy and the New York Giants, but they did hold them down in the points category, but they didn't get many sacks or interceptions. Last week versus the Giants, it was a mediocre day, 6 points allowed and a sack, but this week at the Jets, I think they can get some of those other points where they're going to get to the quarterback. Sam Darnold, he's going to be running around back there a lot. And I think this team, they can find the end zone on special teams or defense in this one. So that's 5 defenses I would start here heading into week 16.